The consequences of John's wish. John had always been the adventurous type, with a spirit that craved the thrill of the unknown. He had dreamed of visiting the vast, untouched landscapes of Africa since he was a child, flipping through the pages of his grandfather's dusty National Geographic magazines. So, when the opportunity to take a safari trip of a lifetime presented itself, he didn't hesitate. He packed his bags and boarded the plane, his heart beating with excitement as the aircraft took off into the vast sky. The other passengers were a mix of tourists and locals, all sharing a collective anticipation of the experiences that awaited them on the ground. Little did John know, however, that this journey would take a turn he could never have predicted. Settling into his seat, John couldn't resist the urge to strike up a conversation with the person sitting beside him, a friendly local woman named Mbengu. She spoke with a gentle accent that rolled off her tongue like a melody. Her eyes sparkled with warmth as she shared stories of her homeland, painting vivid images of a bustling markets, majestic wildlife, and the rich tapestry of African culture. She spoke of a destination, a small, untouched village nestled at the edge of the savannah, where John would be spending his time. The more Mbengu talked, the more John felt the excitement bubble within him. This was not going to be just another trip. It was going to be an adventure that would change him in ways he had never imagined. As the plane flew over the endless expanse of the Sahara Desert, Mbengu leaned closer to John and began to tell him a suspenseful myth that had been passed down through generations in her family. It was the story of a great storm that had once ravaged the land, leaving behind a mysterious, sacred tree. This tree, she whispered, had the power to grant a single wish to those who found it. But there was a catch. The wisher had to survive a night alone beneath its branches, facing the trials and tribulations that the storm's vengeful spirits have left in their wake. Her voice grew softer with each word, and John felt a shiver of excitement run down his spine as he pictured himself standing before the ancient tree, the wind howling around him, and the stars above, his only witness to the ultimate test of courage and will. John's curiosity was piqued, and he eagerly asked Mbengu about this legendary tree. She described it as a mighty baboa, or Kremetart, its girth so wide that it looked as if the earth had swallowed a giant and it had grown from its belly. The tree's limbs stretched out like the arms of a welcoming god, offering refuge to the weary travelers. Its bark was scarred with tales of those who had come before, each groove and note a silent testament to a wish granted or denied. The thought of discovering such a wonder in the wilds of Africa filled John with a newfound sense of purpose, and he vowed that he would find it, no matter the cost. But as Mbengu's story grew darker, her expression grew more solemn. She warned John of the perils that guarded the tree. Savage beasts that stalked the night, and the treacherous sands that would swallow a man whole. The storm spirits, she said, were ever vigilant, ensuring that only the bravest and the most worthy could approach the Kremetart's sacred trunk. Her voice grew serious as she spoke of those who had failed, their skeletons picked clean by the desert scavengers, left a grim reminder of their folly. John felt the weight of her words, understanding that this was not a tale to be taken lightly. The plane lurched suddenly, interrupting the spellbinding silence that had filled the cabin. The passengers gasped, and John felt his stomach drop as the aircraft began to shake violently. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, his words unintelligible, but the urgency in his tone unmistakable. The friendly chatter of moments ago was replaced by a palpable fear as the plane continued to plummet. Masks dropped from the ceiling. The fasten seatbelt sign flashed as the crew scurried down the aisles, their faces etched with concern. Mbengu's hand found its way into John's, her eyes wide with terror. The pilot's voice grew clearer, announcing that they were experiencing severe turbulence and that they would be making an emergency landing. John's heart hammered in his chest as he peered out the window, the vast expanse of Africa below them growing alarmingly closer. The landscape was a patchwork of brown and green, with no signs of civilization in sight. The pilot's voices grew more frantic as the passengers' cries grew louder. John could see the fear in Bengu's eyes as she whispered a prayer, her grip on his hand tightening. He closed his eyes, trying to calm his racing thoughts. The plane suddenly jolted again. A burst of flame shot out of the engine, illuminating the cabin in a fiery glow. The smell of burning metal filled John's nostrils, and he knew they were in dire trouble. The pilot's voice grew strained as he reported wing damage. The aircraft's descent grew steeper, and John could feel the panic rising in his throat. He looked back at Mbengu, who had gone pale, her eyes closed, still reciting a prayer under her breath. He knew he had to stay strong, for her, for all of them. With a deafening roar, the plane slammed into the ground, sending a shockwave through John's body. The cabin was a cacophony of screams and the sound of tearing metal. John felt his body thrown forward, the seatbelt cutting into his waist as the plane skidded and tumbled across the unforgiving terrain. The world outside the window was a blur of sand and vegetation, and for a moment he thought he could see the ancient Kremetart tree from the legend, standing tall amidst the chaos, and then everything went black. John came to with a groan, the taste of dust and blood in his mouth. His head was pounding, and his body felt as if he had been through a meat grinder. The cabin was eerily quiet, the only sound the crackling of flames that had begun to consume the wreckage. The smell of burning fuel was thick in the air, making him cough and wheeze as he pushed himself up from his seat. He looked around, his eyes blurry with shock and fear, and realized that Mbengu's seat was empty, the buckle still latched around the vacant spot where she had been. Panic set in, and he had to force himself to focus. He knew that they had to get out before the fire reached the fuel tank. Stumbling through the smoky cabin, John searched for any signs of life. He found several passengers, either unconscious or too injured to move. He unbuckled them, dragging them from the plane as gently as he could manage, his own injuries screaming in protest. His mind raced as he tried to remember everything he had ever read about survival. Once outside, John took a moment to survey the wreckage. The plane had come to rest in a clearing surrounded by dense vegetation, which was now on fire. He knew he had to move fast. Looking around, he noticed that some of the supplies from the cargo hold had been thrown clear of a flaming wreck. He rushed over to the nearest bundle, tearing it open with trembling hands. Inside he found water bottles, blankets, and a first aid kit. He grabbed what he could, his mind racing with thoughts of what he might need in the days ahead. Moving back into the cabin, John began to treat the injured passengers. His medical knowledge was basic, but he knew enough to clean wounds and apply pressure to stop the bleeding. As he worked, he called out for Mbengu, hoping against all hope that she had somehow survived. The smoke grew thicker and the heat from the fire more intense, but he refused to give up. He had promised to keep her safe. In the midst of his search, John stumbled upon a survival manual that had been part of the plane's emergency equipment. He quickly skimmed through the pages, looking for any information that might help him. His eyes fell on a section titled "Finding Water in the Wilderness." The instructions were simple and straightforward, but crucial for their survival. He knew that without water they would not last long in the unforgiving African sun. John managed to gather enough supplies to sustain the small group for a few days, but Mbengu was nowhere to be found. Despite his growing desperation, he knew that he had to prioritize the safety of those around him. He organized the survivors into a makeshift camp, a safe distance from the burning plane. As the flames danced in the night sky, casting an eerie shadow on their face, John couldn't shake the feeling that he had somehow failed. With the immediate danger of a fire now at bay, John realized that their situation was dire. The plane's radio was destroyed. They had no way to signal for help. The thought of Mbengu out there, alone, hurt or worse, gnawed at him. He knew that he had to do something. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, he made a decision. He would venture out into the wild, find her, and bring her back to the others. Grabbing a map from the wreckage, John studied the terrain. He noticed that the landscape to the east looked more hospitable, with a river snaking through the dense vegetation. It was a logical place to find civilization, or, at the very least, a water source. With a heavy heart, he left the survivors in the care of the most capable among them and set off to the east, his boots crunching in the sand as he moved away from the wreck. The first night alone was a test to John's mettle. The unfamiliar sounds of the African wilderness echoed around him, punctuating the silence with a symphony of growls, hoots, and rustling leaves. He built a small fire for warmth and protection, the flames flickering in the inky darkness. He sat cross-legged beside it, his thoughts racing with fear and doubt. Yet, amidst the cacophony of the night, he heard Mbengu's voice in his mind, recounting the tale of a sacred Kremetart tree. It was as if she was with him, guiding him through the trails that lay ahead. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, John felt a surge of energy. The sunrise was nothing like he had ever seen, a fiery display that seemed to set the world ablaze. The air was crisp and cool, and the light danced across the landscape, revealing a path through the brush that looked slightly more trodden than the rest. With newfound determination, he set off, his eyes scanning the ground for any signs of life. He had walked for hours, his legs felt like lead, but the sight of a river in the distance filled him with hope. Suddenly, John's ears perked up at the sound of a rustling in the bushes. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Through the foliage, a majestic giraffe emerged, its posts stark against the early morning light. It paused for a moment, looked at him with curiosity, and gracefully loping away. The sight of the animal brought a smile to John's face, a small but welcome distraction from the gravity of his situation. He had read that giraffes often travelled near water, so he took it as a sign that the river was closer than he had imagined. The path grew clearer as he approached, and soon John could hear the unmistakable sound of rushing water. His heart leapt with hope as he pushed through the last of the underbrush and stepped out into the riverbank. The sight of water, cool and inviting, was a balm to his weary soul. He dropped to his knees and drank greedily, feeling the life-giving liquid rejuvenate his parched body. The river was wide and fast-moving, a stark contrast to the serene, still ponds he had imagined in his head. It was a lifeline, and he knew he had made the right choice in following the path. As the second night fell upon him, John found a suitable spot to set up camp. He had managed to catch a small fish with a makeshift spear that he had found, and had found some edible berries along the way. The fire crackled comfortingly in front of him, casting dancing shadows on the trees around him. Despite the warmth it provided, the darkness beyond the flickering light was daunting. The nocturnal sounds grew louder, more insistent, and he found himself longing for the quiet hum of a plane's engine and the gentle snore of a cabin mate. The danger in the night was ever present, and John was accurately aware of this. He had heard the distant howl of what he could only hope was a pack of wild dogs, and the occasional roar that sent chills down his spine. The fire was his only defense, but even its comfort was a double-edged sword, as he could attract potential predators. He sat up, his eyes scanning the perimeter, his hand tight on the branch he had sharpened into a spear. The sky grew ominously dark, and the gentle breeze that had accompanied the dawn turned into a restless gale. A storm was brewing, and John could feel the electric charge in the air. Clouds rolled in, heavy with a promise of a rain that could either be their salvation or his doom. He had to find shelter and fast. The river had swollen with the promise of a storm, its banks now a precarious ledge that could give way at any moment. The wind picked up, and the clouds didn't lift as morning stretched on. The once clear path was now obscured by the thick foliage, whipped into a frenzy. John's compass had stopped working, spinning erratically, as if it had lost all sense of direction. He tried to recall the landmarks from the map, but the landscape had changed so much with the storm approaching that he wasn't sure he could trust his memory. The rain started to fall, in fat droplets, each one stinging like a tiny pinprick against his sunburnt skin. Through the rain and mist, John began to spot strange creatures that he had never seen before. At first he thought they were figments of his imagination, conjured by his sleep-deprived and fear-addled mind. But as the rain grew heavier, the shapes grew more defined. They were lanky beings with elongated necks and heads that seemed to float just above the grass. The creatures that darted through the trees with an unnatural speed, leaving only a blur in their wake. He blinked, wondering if he was hallucinating from dehydration. Mbengu's warning about the vengeful spirits of a storm echoed in his mind. He stumbled on. The rain pummeled him, turning the ground to mud beneath his feet. He remembered her tales of fierce beasts that guarded the sacred Kremetart tree, and his heart raced as the thought about what he might be lurking in the shadows, watching him. The storm had transformed the landscape into something out of a nightmare, and the line between reality and myth grew increasingly blurred. John pushed forward, the rain now coming down in droves, obscuring his vision. Each step felt like a battle against the relentless elements. His clothes clung to him, heavy and sodden, and the cold seeped into his very bones. Yet the thought of Mbengu and the promise he had made to her kept him going. He had to find help. He had to survive. As the storm raged on, John caught a glimpse of something peculiar through the driving rain. Tiny, floating lights in the distance. They bobbed and weaved as if dancing to the storm's frenzied rhythm. At first he dismissed it as a trick of a light, a hallucination brought on by his fatigue. But as he stumbled closer, he realized they were real. A series of soft, ethereal orbs hovering just above the ground. The lights grew more numerous, guiding him through the tempest like a string of glowing breadcrumbs. He followed them, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he pushed through the underbrush. The rain stung his eyes, but he couldn't tear them away from the mesmerizing spectacle. The lights grew brighter, forming a path that led him to the clearing where the mighty Kremetart tree stood, just as Mbengu had described it. Its massive trunk was scarred with ancient markings, and its limbs stretched out like the arms of a protector. The voices of the past whispered to him, echoing Mbengu's words of caution. He knew that this was not the place to be taken lightly. The spirits of a storm were restless, and the tree's power was not to be trifled with. Yet, as he approached, the voices grew softer, and the storm's fury seemed to abate. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and the wind died down to a gentle sigh. It was as if the tree itself has recognized his need and granted him a moment of peace. Standing before the Kremetart, John felt a sense of awe and trepidation. He had come so far, faced so much, and now the reality of the tree's mythical presence was almost too much to bear. He took a deep breath and reached out to touch the ancient bark, feeling its rough texture beneath his fingertips. The tree was warm to the touch, almost alive, and he could feel a pulse of energy that had seemed to resonate with the beat of his own heart. The clear voice from the tree spoke again, echoing through the now still air. Those who seek power shall not be entertained, it said firmly, cutting through John's thoughts like a knife. He took a step back, his hand dropping to his side. The voice was neither male nor female, young nor old, but it carried the weight of the centuries. It was a warning, a reminder that the tree's power was not to be taken lightly. John pondered the words, his eyes never leaving the Kremetart. He knew that his need was great, but he also knew the cost of greed. He had seen it before, in the lives of those who took more than they needed and ended up losing everything. The tree had a wisdom that was as old as the sands that surrounded them, and he had to be careful not to succumb to his own desires. His wish had to be pure, untainted by selfishness. The tree seemed to sense his contemplation, and the gentle voice returned. The storm has brought you here, but it is your courage and resolve that will determine your fate, it whispered. John's mind raced, his thoughts a tumultuous sea of doubt and hope. He knew that the tree was not just speaking of the physical trials he had endured, but of the moral and spiritual battles that lay ahead. The ancient Kremetart spoke of wishes and their consequences, telling him that each wish granted came with a price. Some paid with their heart's desires, others with their very being. It spoke of a delicate balance of the universe and the responsibility that came with wielding power. John's heart grew heavy, understanding that his wish could not be for his own gain, but for the greater good, for those who had suffered alongside him. He took a moment to gather his thoughts, the whispers of a tree's wisdom echoing in his mind. Then, with a clarity that cut through the chaos of his fears, John made his wish. It was not for riches, nor fame, nor even to find Mbengu, though the thought of her was a constant ache in his heart. Instead, he wished for the safety and well-being of all those who had survived the plane crash, and for the strength to guide them through this perilous journey. As the words left his lips, the tree shuddered, its mighty limbs groaning with the weight of his request. The lights that had guided him swirled around the Kremetart, coalescing into a swirling vortex of energy that enveloped John. The wind picked up again, not with its previous ferocity, but a gentle insistence, as if urging him to stand firm in his conviction. The storm spirits grew quiet, their whispers fading into the background as the tree's power surged through John. It was a strange sensation, both exhilarating and terrifying. He felt a warmth spread from the soles of his feet to the top of his head, filling him with a sense of peace and purpose. The tree had heard his wish. As the energy enveloped him, John felt his body weaken, his legs buckled, and he crumbled to the ground beneath the tree's vast canopy. The world around him grew dimmer, the voices of the spirits retreating into the shadows of darkness crept in from the edges of his vision. He was aware of the rain continuing to fall, each drop a gentle caress upon his skin, but he could no longer find the strength to stand. With a final surge, the Kremetart's power coursed through John, and then everything went quiet. The storm spirits had ceased their cacophony, and the only sound was the soft patter of rain on leaves. His eyes fluttered close, and he felt the warm earth embrace him as he surrendered to the overwhelming exhaustion that had been building within him. As he descended into unconsciousness, John had the fleeting thought that he had made the right choice, that his wish was pure. John woke with a start, the rain no longer a gentle lullaby, but a harsh drumming against his eardrums. He sat up, his eyes darting around in confusion. The tree, the Ephraimites, the whispers, the storm spirits, they were gone, leaving no trace behind. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, and the river had swollen to a raging beast that threatened to swallow the land. The clearing was now a lake of murky water, and his clothes were plastered to his body, weighing him down like a rock. As John struggled to his feet, a group of figures emerged from the tree line. At first he thought they were more hallucinations born of his desperation, but as they drew closer he realized they were real. They were locals, their skin glistening in the rain, their eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and concern. One of them, an older man with a wise, lined face, approached John with a gentle smile, his voice speaking in a language that John couldn't understand, but somehow felt familiar. The man gestured for John to follow, and despite his fear and confusion, John found himself trusting him. He knew that if he was going to find help, he had to rely on the kindness of these strangers. They led him through the storm, their bare feet sure and steady against the slick earth. John stumbled along behind them, his boots slipping in the mud. The rain grew heavier, but the villagers didn't seem to notice, moving with a grace that spoke of a deep connection to the land. Finally, the storm cleared, and the rain tapered off. The outline of a well-developed town emerged through the mist. The buildings were made of brick, vibrant colors painted on the walls that seemed to sing in the newfound sunlight. The villagers quickened their pace, and John's heart swelled with hope. He could see people moving about, going about their daily lives, seemingly oblivious to the tragedy that had brought him to their doorstep. As they entered the town, the villagers' whispers grew louder, and John felt their eyes upon him. The elder who had taken the lead raised his hand in silent command. The murmurs ceased. The villagers parted to reveal a clear path to the center of the town. The elder's eyes met John's, and in them John saw a flicker of understanding. The elder spoke rapidly, and then nodded, gestured for John to approach. John stumbled forward, his legs trembling with exhaustion and the weight of his journey. The villagers had found the plain and had been searching for survivors, the elder told him. They had treated the wounded and buried the dead with respect and ceremony that the situation required. John felt a profound sense of gratitude that they had not left his companions to the mercy of the elements. As he approached, the old man spoke in a slow, deliberate tone. John realized that he was the only person capable of speaking English in this village. "You speak of a great tree," the old man said, his gaze piercing John's soul. "A tree of power and legend. But you must understand, young traveler, that such myths are for the hearts of children and the fires of storytellers. This world is a harsh and unforgiving place. It does not grant wishes, nor does it care for our desires." John felt a pang of doubt, remembering the vividness of his encounter with the Kremetart, and the power that had flowed through him. John nodded, understanding the old man's words, but unable to shake the conviction that had grown within him. He knew he had to find Mbengu, and he hoped that the strength granted by the Kremetart would guide him to her. The villagers took him in, offering him food and shelter and tending to his injuries. They spoke little of the outside world, and their eyes grew distant when John mentioned the tree. Days turned into weeks, and John rested and regained his strength. The villagers were kind to him, sharing their knowledge of the land and the ways of the wild. He learned to track animals, find water, listen to the whispers of the wind, sense the approaching of danger. Yet the call of home grew stronger with each passing day, and he knew that he could not stay with them forever. Finally the day came when John felt ready to leave. The elder, who had been watching him with a knowing eye, handed him a crude map drawn on paper. It showed the way back to the crash site, and then beyond, to a place where civilization waited for him. John took the map with trembling hands, feeling the weight of the journey ahead. When John finally reached the crash site, it was eerily silent. The survivors were gone. Signs of their departure told him that they had moved to the airport. Along the scattered debris, he found a small bundle wrapped in a torn piece of cloth. Inside was a carved wooden pendant in the shape of a Kremetart leaf, warm to the touch despite the cool breeze. He knew, without understanding how, that it was a gift from Mbengu, or perhaps from something older. Weeks later, after enduring river crossings, sleepless nights, and a final rescue by a humanitarian team, John was on a plane bound for Europe. Yet the weight of a pendant around his neck reminded him that part of him had not left Africa. He thought of the Kremetart's voice, of a wish he had made, and realized that the survivors' rescue, arranged by the very villagers who had found him, was no coincidence. His wish had come true, but at a price. He had been changed. Back home, life was not as it once had been. The streets of his city felt smaller, the conversations trivial. The energy that had filled him in Africa was still there, but so was a haunting restlessness. At night he dreamed of endless plains and voices in the winds. And sometimes when the rain lashed against his window, he could hear the whisper again. The storm has brought you here, but it is your courage and resolve that will determine your fate. John knew that the wishes were not gifts, but burdens, responsibilities that tied you to the people and places they had touched. He had returned to Europe, but the cost of his wish was that in his heart would forever belong to the savannah, to the people that had saved him, to a tree that might not exist in the waking world. And so, with a pendant close to his chest, he began to plan his return to Africa.